Okay, we're speaking with Nate Phelps, who is the estranged son of Fred Phelps, of course, of Westboro Baptist Church fame. Nate, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Dave.
So give us the background. I mean, I'm fascinated to be walked through this. You were born in Topeka, Kansas, where the Westboro Baptist Church is?
Yeah, I was born in 58 there. I was the sixth child of what eventually became 13.
And so you are Shirley Phelps-Roper's brother?
Yeah, she actually was born on Halloween in the year before I was born.
So you have the same, but you don't have the same birthday?
No, I was actually born in November.
So give me your earliest memories of what it was like. I mean, is there an indoctrination that begins very young? I can't even imagine what it was like to be in that situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know that that's how my father would have characterized it, but from the time we were born, literally, when a child came home from the hospital, they were there in the pew on Sunday morning. My father scoffed at the idea of Sunday school because he thought that the children should be hearing the Word of God from their earliest moments. So we were in the church twice on every Sunday, listening to our father's idea of what the Bible taught about God and man's condition and that type of thing. So that was pounded into us from the very beginning of our lives.
So how early on does the very direct anti-gay rhetoric start?
As early as I can remember, he considered homosexuality to be a unique sin against God because he saw a passage I think in Romans that talks about God giving them up to their vile affections as evidence that this was a unique sin that you couldn't return from, that God gave you away, that you can't turn back and be saved. So homosexuality was considered particularly evil in his eyes.
Now, as a kid, I'm guessing you have no point of reference to evaluate the statements that you're being told. So what happened? Well, first of all, when you first were exposed to that type of thing, did you just believe it? You thought that is the truth?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just like you said, what choice do you have? A child gets their idea, their notions of the world from their caregivers, in this case from our father. And as you grow older, then of course you start seeing and hearing ideas that are contradictory or in violation of what you've been taught. But especially in those early years, and especially because of the way my father taught us, that there was, you'll go out there in the world and you'll hear these other ideas, but they're evil, they're of the devil. And so that's just how we incorporated that information in. We just expected that the rest of the world was evil.
So it was a calculated, preemptive warning. You're going to hear other things, but just be aware that this is the right thing.
Yeah, and that I can't say whether that's consistent with all religions, but I'll tell you that was a key, crucial component of what the process my father put us through. Because even into adulthood, you're constantly questioning yourself when you're reading other ideas or considering other ideas, whether your motive is pure, whether it's appropriate to even be asking these kind of questions.
And how can you put a number on how old you were when you first just heard the term "God hates fags" used? I mean, can you even remember?
Well, I don't know that he used that specific term. That's kind of become their catchphrase. But
yeah,
I typically, when I think about where I was, what age I was when I started asking legitimate questions, I'd say I was probably 7, 8 years old.
So you were 7 or 8, and you started to question what you were being taught.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a very juvenile sense, but he would suggest that some event or some sequence of events or some idea that suggested that God's hand was involved in some affair on the earth, and I would say to myself, well, why can't it just be that it's the way it is? That we don't have to add this additional component into this. So those kind of questions were there. Perhaps my motive at that time was fear. I don't know, because the image we had of God was pretty frightening.
So originally, it sounds like it wasn't the anti-gay, homosexuals are behind everything type of thing that you were questioning. It was just more generally God and religion.
That's right. And another big component of it was that you grow up with this idea of that we are a unique people, that we stand out among all men on the earth. And yet I saw my father's behavior and his attitudes and his words and his actions towards other humans. And it was, on the one hand, you would expect almost this holiness or this otherworldliness in us because, think about that claim, right? And instead, we were just base as far as just being cruel and unkind and hateful towards other humans. So that was another strong motivator for me to ask questions. How is this possible that we are this unique people on the earth, but we're behaving this way?
So at this point, were the public protests and picketing of funerals and that type of thing, was that going on at this point? This was some years ago.
Yeah, no. This was years before they actually started this campaign. This campaign started in '91.
Right.
But the same components, the same behavior, the same attitudes. My father was constantly in a battle with someone in his world. He was fighting judges. He was fighting lawyers. He was fighting members of my family. He was fighting neighbors. That was who he was, and he just couched it or justified it or explained it in terms of his relationship with God and that the world was at enmity with God.
So this makes me think kind of nature versus nurture. Something happened within you that did not happen within Shirley, for example, or other siblings, which made you question and not just accept at face value what you were told. What do you think of that? Is it something genetic? Was there something you were exposed to that they weren't? Where do you see that?
Yeah, that question ultimately in my mind is impossible to answer with absolute clarity. I think
Sure.
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that there's this notion, I don't know if I articulate it well, but there's this notion of kind of a feedback loop that as we start getting information about our world and who we are and how we fit into it, then we take that in and then we start viewing the world within that context. So very early on, as I started asking these questions to myself, because understand clearly, you don't ask these questions of our Father because it's just not acceptable.
Right.
But as I started asking these questions, then it came out as a, passive-aggressive defiance of my father's authority or his position. So he and I became, we were at odds fairly early on in my life. So that kind of feeds the whole process as well. So by the time I'm 16, 17 years old, I'm convinced that I have no business there, that I don't belong in that situation.
So walk me through, how do you leave? Do you talk to Fred Phelps and say, I'm leaving, or how does it all happen? What's your first step?
No, yeah. My older brother Mark had left when I was, I think I was 16 years old, maybe still 15, but sometime in that period of my life, he had made the decision to leave. And so we observed that. This was the first one who left, and in spite of my father's intense efforts to draw him back in, he stayed gone. So then, of course, Mark became the topic of many of my father's sermons, and he became the example of what would happen to the rest of us if we left. So it became very clear pretty quickly that if I intended to follow suit, that I had to be very careful not only not to let my father know, but not to let anybody in my family know, because there was this attitude that we grew up with that, we were always searching for favor in our father's eyes. So if we found something in the environment that thought would be important to him, then we would go run into him and tell him, and then that would, we would throw any of our siblings under the bus in a moment's notice. So it was important for me to stay as quiet and private about that decision as possible.
But eventually, once you leave, he knows you have left, right, at that point?
Yeah. Well, at that point, but see, he made it clear that once we left, that we were ostracized, that, we were, first of all, the language he used was we were delivered to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. So we now lived under this certainty that God was angry with us and that he was going to punish us. We didn't know what form that would take, but we knew it was going to happen.
I mean, is that,
And
would you consider that abusive? Is it abuse for a father to convince his son that if he leaves, if he takes a certain path, that he is going to be hated by God, essentially?
well, yeah, of course, that's exactly what I believe. I think that the whole, so much of the message of Christianity, at least his version of it, is abusive because it suggests, I when I was 8 years old, I remember terrified, sitting in the pew and trying to imagine an eternity burning in hell. And it was reduced to tears. It was just stark terror in the mind of an 8-year-old child. So all of those components were, in my opinion, very abusive. But I don't know necessarily that it's fair to say that my father deliberately abused his children. He believes this stuff.
Right. Interesting. So how old were you when you finally did leave?
Well, I left on the night of my 18th birthday. I had decided that I was going to do it, so I started making plans, and I bought an old, this thing was a year younger than God. It was a Rambler Classic, and I barely ran, and I bought it, and I hid it up the street so no one knew that I owned it. Mm-hmm. And then as my birthday approached, I started packing my belongings a little bit at a time and hiding them in the garage. So on the night of my 18th birthday, once everybody was asleep, I went out, got the car, and backed it into the driveway and loaded all my stuff up, and then stood down in the living room and waited for the clock to hit midnight, and then I left.
Why did you wait? Just so it was completely legal, you waited for midnight? Is that what it was?
Yeah, because my older sister, Catherine, had tried to leave when she was 17, and so once again, the younger children were able to observe my father literally forcing her back physically.
Wow.
And she went through about 3 or 4 months of just brutal physical abuse as he tried to beat her into submission.